feel as if they're continually starting from the beginning. In the background of this, I think, is the fact that software is about repeatedly trying to solve problems that you will not understand until you have solved them. This basically motivates the extreme programming mantra. So make it run, make it right, make it fast is about saying you can't make it right first time. You have to get it wrong in order to discover how to get it right. And I think this is basically what this cartoon is about. That it is natural to find yourself continually thinking you don't understand the problem you're trying to solve until you've tried to solve it. Now, if I had to give just one reason why pair programming should play a part in any kind of software engineering, it would be don't live in this cartoon. Pair programming prevents you from hiding from others and hiding from yourself this repeated experience of returning to basics and having to try and solve something that feels like you haven't done this before. So that's one side of the coin. If we never pair programming, we'll be sorry. So the question is, why don't we always pair program? Now, for my money, most research papers in psychology and sociology and so on belong in the Journal of Irreproducible Results. But I did once see some definitions that really spoke to me. An introvert is someone who gains energy when they're alone and loses it when they are with other people. An extrovert is someone who gains energy with other people and loses it when they're alone. Now, a fairly common small talk temperament, I think, is to be self-assured, opinionated, quite happy to be in company, quite happy to talk, and yet to be an introvert in this sense. Now, at this point, I probably need an example. Someone who's a small talker, who is fairly opinionated, talks a lot, talks fast a lot. Yeah, you have an example.
Yeah, me?
Oh, right, yeah, sorry, I thought you were going to say me. Yeah. Me, you, probably quite a few in the room, yes. We have volunteers for this position. Now, that's not all small talkers. I have known small talkers who can pair program for 6 hours a day after day, week after week, and they're happy. They don't need their own space, and they'll sometimes put it like that. They'll say, I don't need my own space. I've known other small talkers who pair program for 2 hours, and it's not that they're unhappy, but they're ready to stop. There's a heartfelt sigh of relief. And I think that's this kind of temperamental thing. Now, one of the ways in which I just try to address this is to try and make as much of what's going to happen anyway in terms of pair interaction, pair programming. As I see it, you can learn much better where someone is on a task you've given them by pair programming with them for an hour on that task than you can by getting them to give you a report of where they are. If you have a design debate, I think doing that design debate with the code in front of you is much more productive sometimes than doing that design debate without the code in front of you. So one of the things I do is simply, whenever I am the one giving the orders or making the pointed suggestions, is just to say, all right, we're going to do a lot of pair programming just as part of operating the team. And that way it becomes very familiar, whether it's pulling up a chair in front of a computer or whether it's turning on your shared screen program. It becomes very familiar to do pair programming. And another thing I tend to do is say, thou shalt pair program for some proportion of time. Not a large proportion of time, but just to say, it's going to happen every week. There will be something. So, despite my loud mouth, my fast speech, I'm really an introvert. So, when is this least noticeable? When is it most noticeable? The most effective pair program session I ever had was when I was working on a team where the domain expert was a sales guy who had realized that the customer needed something. He was also very good at talking fast and opinionated. Nevertheless, nobody else on the team had a clue what it was the customer wanted. It was a gleam in his eye. So I eventually built something that was incredibly wrong and not what the customer wanted, but it was the best I could do with my understanding. And then we pair programmed remotely. I think it was the last time I ever actually used net meeting in Angular. And step by step, high-level API method from high-level API method, I explained what my system was trying to do to meet his requirements, and he explained why that wasn't what it should be doing at all. And I either changed it, or I wrote pseudocode, or I wrote comments. And at the end, after several hours, I understood what the customer wanted. I really understood it. He could explain it a bit better. I could explain it a lot better to the rest of the team. I was primed for a major refactor, and we'd achieved a lot. And that felt great. And I've been in other situations like that, situations where a web expert or a domain expert feel that they can do, are cooperating on a project. And at the end of parent sessions like that, you just feel absolutely wonderful. And you think, why don't I write every line of code that way? Why do I ever do anything except parent program? Well, actually, sorry, let me hold off on that. Another case is where I'm a newbie and I'm pair programming someone and I learn a great deal as well as solving a task when I've just arrived in some team or some task. And that also feels great for me, but that, of course, is one hint as to why we don't always pair program. I've been on the old-timer side of that, and I've sometimes been told, okay, you need to pair with X, be patient. Not because X is a difficult guy, he's a great guy. Not because X is stupid, he's clever, but because he's going to ask me a lot of questions at every stage of the process. And that will in many ways be helpful. Sometimes I fix things because when he asks a question, it's just so embarrassing to admit that I've never got around to fixing this trivia. Sometimes I correct the documentation because it's just so embarrassing to admit that we really haven't updated it in the last 2 years. And sometimes I actually understand something because I'm asked to explain it. And by the time I finished explaining it, I understand it. And always I take 3 times as long to do some probably fairly routine task. And so that's one occasion. A more common occasion is when you actually have an equality of, rough equality of skill, and you don't necessarily have an equality of temperament. And again, that can be, of course, productive. Some people are naturally innovative, some people are naturally punctilious and make them dot the I's and cross the T's, and that can be good. Some people are always trying to write the generic solution, and some people force them to wait and do a couple of real solutions before they try and come up with a generic solution. And that can be great. But it doesn't always feel as good because your coding style is being constrained by someone else. That may be in a very deep sense, or it may be in a very shallow sense. Some people are they're just not as pedantic, as careful as I am, and they're not as they don't necessarily know that the way I format Smalltalk code is the right way, and stuff like that. And so these are examples of a more general issue. So the question is, how exactly should you go about persuading your pair programmer that your way of approaching the problem is the best of the 2 or 20 ways? Should you just know that he really needs to know what you think, or should he in fact, should you sometimes not even try to do this? I think small talkers tend to be strong-willed. I have a theory about why this is. I think most small talkers, well, quite a few of you, went through my experience in the 90s of explaining to managers that I didn't think Java was really that good. No, we're not going to rewrite Java. No, it really would be a bad idea to rewrite Java. No, I absolutely refuse to be transferred to Java Group. No, you will pry Smaltak from my cold, dead hands. And so the weak will become Java programmers and small talkers. Only the strong survive, or possibly only the most obstreperous, argumentative, and difficult. But someone recognised that I had an occasional moment of self-knowledge there. But anyway, the fact is, that's one theory. There may be a lot of other theories, and there are rewards for those who come to me afterwards with suggestions for the other theories. But whatever the reason, I find it very restful to pair program with someone who lets me drive. It's not always very productive, but it is very restful. And I find it very productive at times to pair program with other strong-willed small talkers, but I sometimes need a rest after I've done so. Some people try to address this issue with rules. I've heard people say, oh, every 30 minutes you should change over who's the driver and who's the watcher. I find that completely unnatural. I mean, sometimes you're changing over every 30 seconds, and more generally, you know, it's as likely to be wrong as right. So what I tend to do is, where I pair program with people frequently, I tend to sort of think a little about their temperament and mine, and very occasionally, obviously 99% of the time you want to talk small talk code, or I wouldn't be here, but very occasionally actually talk about the issues. For example, some people are word thinkers, they think in words verbally, and some people are image thinkers. And word thinkers talk fast, and they interrupt fast. I'm very good at interrupting people, very good at that. And image thinkers will talk slower, and also when they interrupt, they have an idea that this is something needs to be done or something would be helpful here. When they interrupt, they need time to turn their thought into words, and so it can help sometimes to recognize these differences of temperament and recognize you're freezing someone out if you're really good at interrupting, as I sadly am. And of course, there are a lot of other temperamental differences. I mean, some people love to polish code, some people love to get on, some people love to get exactly the right name for the class, some people prefer to leave that later. And generally, of course, I'm talking about that just occasionally and phrasing it in terms of the more and the less and the trade-off rather than the my way is right and your way is wrong. Basically, I guess what I'm saying is maybe this cartoon isn't quite the right way to sell either small talk or your way of doing it or whatever it is. Oh yes, I should mention, by the way, I did have a team leader once who would often talk of the creative engagement of combative intellects, or the combative engagement of creative intellects, and he never settled on one of them. And I think that was actually very wise of him, or accidentally, perhaps. I find it never quite settles, so that is certainly something I find about pair. Now, so far, of course, everything I've said about why you would ever hesitate to pair program has been pretty negative. So are there any good reasons why you wouldn't pair program? Well, I suppose, of course, it does take two people to do one task. So there's a fantastic amount of research and coding issues that don't need it. And also, of course, often familiarizing yourself with an area, or more actually re-familiarizing yourself with an area. When you know perfectly well you know an area, but you haven't looked at it recently. It may be a mere kindness to get yourself up to speed before you pair program. But more significantly is the fact that while many great ideas come in pair programming sessions, sometimes they come alone. I'm going the wrong way. You're absolutely right. I'm an idiot. Okay, this is actually terribly appropriate because the next sentence in my notes is, can I walk and chew gum at the same time? And the answer only too clearly is no. Okay, my apologies, guys. We were going the wrong way there. You are now looking at the right side. Yeah. I should pair program in giving my talk something. So anyway, yes. Can I walk and chew gum at the same time? Can I talk to my pair programmer and actually think at the same time? There's a kind of thinking that I can't do when I'm pair programming. And while that could be an example of the introvert who loses energy when in company, I don't think it is. I think there's a kind of design work, kind of design thinking that I can do, which I can do better alone. I know when I stood up here 15 years ago, I boldly announced that thanks to the wonders of XP and refactoring, the only time you really needed to do advanced design work was when you had some kind of tax on refactoring. You had an interface that you couldn't change or something like that. I still think there's something in that, but I'm backing away quite a lot from that emphatic statement. And I do think sometimes it helps to actually come having put non-trivial alone time thought into the issue. There's also the question of tunnel vision. When you're alone, how many times have you got up to make yourself a cup of coffee and while you're doing that suddenly think, oh, I could do this some other way? Now that also happens when you pair program. I think because you're paired, you're focused on doing it some way, and then it's when you separate that you suddenly think, I could do that another way. Sometimes your pair is this person who says, hey, we could do that another way, but sometimes it helps to avoid tunnel vision. And of course, also sometimes you simply realize you've run out of ideas on this. You are wittering on and on, and the kindest thing you can do for your pair programmer is to frankly admit that you really don't need to say at great length that you've run out of ideas. You can just say, hey, we need to stop it now for a bit. I need to recharge, I need to read something else. I need to sleep on it. And of course, there is, having looked at all these good reasons, let's also again look at one very bad reason why we sometimes don't pair program as much as we should. When you're pair programming and you're driving, you cannot be lazy. Pair programming is a discipline, and there's a very, very trivial sense in which pair programming is a discipline. So much for pair programming. Now we look at the tools. 15 years ago, I led a team, and usually 6, sometimes as much as 10, not all co-located. We met up for 2 days in every 2 weeks, and for the rest of the time, some of us were away, their own homes, and therefore we actually ran every meeting as a pair program meeting. All of us, even the ones who were on the site, would actually sit down at our desks, put on our boom mics, connect up with that meeting, and all be seeing the same screen. And that way it was very, very easy to pair program. And it all worked very nicely. And today, I often feel like the tools have gone backwards. Now this is an unfair feeling, and it's largely my fault. But the fact is, these days, often you chat to someone on Skype, the chat leads into some session. At some point someone shares screen and you're looking at their screen, and you're on basic Skype, you don't have the ability to take control of their mouse. You say scroll up, and then you say, no, when I said up I meant down in the debugger, etc., etc. And at every moment it's somehow just a little too much difficulty to start up your WebEx session or fire up your VNC server, and yet you're not doing that. And that's to say nothing of the fact that Skype frequently hiccups on the sound and so on and so forth. So it's actually astonishing to me how often I'm in sessions that are not quite as good sound quality and don't have quite as good screen sharing as before. So I wrote this slide as virtually a confession to say, yes, I really should push for better tools. And I do think that is pretty important. I don't have anything like as much useful, even in my opinion, to say about refactoring. Looking at what I've done now that I did not do 15 years ago, well, I certainly notice I use inline method a lot more to create big methods that I then split apart into as many small methods, but breaking them differently. I use add-remove parameter rather more add parameter to shove behavior up the hierarchy and state down the hierarchy, and remove parameter to help me move data from parameters to instbars and so on. And I still use convert to sibling occasionally, and I still find myself thinking every time I do, I really should just comment the UI of this so it's a bit clearer. And other than that, I have not much to say about refactoring except that I do a lot of it. A bit more to say about test-driven development. You all know the mantra,
write a test before you write a line of production code. Don't always do that. I don't always do that, and actually, I think it relates to what I was saying before, that you, in order to solve a problem in coding, in programming, you have to solve the problem in order to understand the problem you're trying to solve. And so that also applies to tests. Do you actually write a test, or do you write a few classes to give you some idea of what your test will actually be talking to? And I do, therefore, at the very beginning, therefore, hesitate sometimes to do that. I have two approaches sort of to this. One is to treat a test as a workspace. I've seen a lot of small talkers, they start out by throwing things together in a workspace, and eventually it goes into a test. And I find, actually, there's no reason why you shouldn't actually create a test method which you treat exactly like a workspace. It's easier to hit run than it is to endlessly reselect the right amount of the workspace. And you're more likely to turn it into a test. But if you know at first, this is my workspace, which I just happen to have defined in a method, then I find that's just slightly more empowering. Another thing I do, particularly when I'm talking to domain experts, is almost instantly write a test for what it is they're telling me, even though it's just a method name and some comments. It feels more empowering, and I think it is. And the converse of that, of course, is to avoid too specific tests. You don't want your tests to constrain the how as opposed to the what. I know from 15 years experience and more that the test framework is incredibly empowering. And I make it a rule whenever I add a test to a test framework, not simply to treat it as a separate task, but to say, how can I refactor my test framework? How can I make the work of adding this test really trivial? And so I think that kind of combination is very valuable. I think that will do as regards tests. So what am I trying to say here? Well, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that programming is hard, and I know at least one person who's not that good at it, and I think it's no accident that extreme programming occurred in Smaltak. They both push the boundary. They both start from a humble position of assuming that you're not going to get it right first time, but you will get it right in time. Pair programming, well, people were saying I should sing, so how does the song go? I get by with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Or, as the cartoon says, light a single candle. So, with my final one, I'd like to thank you, Apologia Provitasua. Do I know how to do this? I think Norm has to be given a prize when it comes to collaboration. Questions?
Yes. So, what advice do you have for trying to convince higher level executives that pair programming is not taking two resources away from solving multiple outstanding issues? So we oftentimes face, we've got 10 outstanding issues, but if two engineers are working on one problem together, they perceive it as, what about the 9 other issues? You could be, be working on 2 issues.
Have you tried suggesting to them that they stop going to meetings? Because that takes several hours a week, and if they all just work separately on issues, that would do it.
I have maybe not a question but a comment on pair programming as well. There is this theory of cognitive diversity, which basically is the wisdom of the crowd, right? So I personally have only experienced it once many years ago, where there would be more than 2 people in a group programming effort. Can you comment on the dynamic of 2 people versus 3 or 4?
You're quite right that sometimes, you know, I mean, two people are more limited, but I think even with two people, there is a danger that one person is driving and one person is out. And if you've got three or more, I think you have to think, do you at that point need someone to be in charge? For example, we were having pair programming sessions of 6, but I was sort of chairing and trying to bring people in. I think if you didn't have a chair, my instinct, which I do not claim has any value, would be to wonder if some people would be excluded. You'd actually have just effectively 2 or 3 people who were being dynamic in that group and the rest watching. So, but I mean, you undoubtedly could, with a newbie situation, of course, there might be value with that be patient thing that I mentioned. Perhaps if you had 3 people, so not everyone was being patient. I think on the whole, two people keep each other up to the mark. With 3 people, one person can be the passenger, is my instinct, for what it's worth.
You mentioned the tools you used were worse than beforehand. When I recall my Skype experience, so to say, I usually had an extra monitor on the navigator side where I would think ahead and look up code that my guide was going to need soon. So where you say, okay, you need that method.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And then I didn't really, I really didn't want to pull into his process by taking out the keyboard or mouse, simply have my own image as an extra tool, so to say.
That is quite true, and I remember doing that from the old net meeting days. I should stress, I said it felt worse, it wasn't really worse. The very breadth of tools and the fact that we're all on different platforms and there's a need for commonality means you fall into using the basic tool instead of putting work in to make sure that every time you chat to someone, you're instantly set up to share screen. I think the difference, there are times when it just is so much easier to take the mouse and type the one word that is in your mind than to explain, you know, scroll up further, no, I meant down there, up, yeah, that's it, and then further over, particularly with me, of course, when I'm quite capable of getting into further, I speak faster and faster as I try and get the mouse over, no, it's left, it's that tab, you know. Really, I wonder sometimes how people endure it.